This monstrous story, which occurred in 2005, shocked the whole of Britain with its cruelty. A young girl, who by the age of 18 had built a successful modeling career, was found 10 meters from the door of her own house. The police spent enormous resources trying to find the culprit, and only a tiny DNA sample helped them in their case. Sally Bowman was born on September 11, 1987 in London. She grew up in a large family. She had 3 older sisters. Later, her parents, Linda and Paul, divorced, but the girl continued to maintain a good relationship with her father. Sally was a cheerful and friendly girl with a big heart. At the same time, she was also very responsible. Already in her teens, she got a job and moved into rented housing. The girl did not want to be financially dependent on her parents, but continued to see her family regularly. Sally later attended the prestigious London School of Performing Arts and Technology Brit. This educational institution is known for such graduates as actor Tom Holland, Adele and Amy Winehouse. Sally dreamed of working as a model, and the fact that she was able to enroll in this school was a big step towards her cherished goal. After graduating from school in 2004, the girl worked for some time as a hairdresser and model, but in January 2005 she got a job at the London modeling agency Elite Model Management. From the first months, Sally achieved impressive success in her new job. She became the face of the popular watch brand Swatch, and also took part in prestigious fashion shows. As a result, by the age of 18 she managed to build a very successful career. On Saturday, September 24, 2005, Sally went to visit her mother and spent most of the day at her home. Later, her older sister Nicole called her and invited her to her best friend's birthday party. Sally agreed, and at about 6 o'clock in the evening she left her mother's house. Finally, she said that she loved her. At 10 p.m. the girl met her sister and friends at the Light Bar in the center of Croydon. CCTV footage from the bar showed that Sally was having a great time. The group was having fun, chatting and dancing. At approximately 1 a.m., Sally left the bar with her sister. They walked to her house, but the girl did not stay there for long. On the way, she phoned her ex-boyfriend Lewis Scorts and agreed to meet him in the center of Croydon. At about 3:30 she got into a taxi and drove to the appointed place. During the meeting, a quarrel occurred between them. They broke up just a few weeks ago due to mutual claims and since then have unsuccessfully tried to sort out this situation. Lewis decided to give her a ride home on Blenheim Crescent and they continued to argue the whole way. The couple sorted things out until about 4:15 a.m., after which Sally got out of the car and headed home. Around the same time, the neighbors were awakened by an incomprehensible noise, which gave way to screaming. People ran to the windows, but nothing suspicious was happening on the street. After 5 minutes, they only saw an unknown man walking down the street. At about 7:30 in the morning, one of the neighbors came out of the house and noticed something strange. From behind a construction container standing nearby, something was peeking out that he at first took to be the legs of a mannequin. But as soon as the neighbor came closer, a terrible sight awaited him. There lay the half-naked body of a dead girl. It turned out to be Sally Bowman. The police quickly arrived at the scene and sealed off the area. I managed to find the murder weapon. However, later experts found the DNA of an unknown man on the girl's body. They also found that Sally had been stabbed at least 7 times with a sharp object and had been assaulted. The unknown maniac even left several bite marks on her body. Sally's family was devastated by the news. When her mother heard a knock on the door this morning, she thought it was Sally who had returned home, but the police were on the doorstep and told her that her daughter had been murdered. Within a few hours, Sally's mother and sister had to go to the morgue for identification. They hoped to the last that it was all one big mistake and Sally was actually alive. Only after seeing her remains did they realize it was really her. Meanwhile, the police began an investigation. First of all, they checked the DNA sample from the girl's body against the databases, but this did not help them identify the criminal. There were also no surveillance cameras in that area, which only made the work more difficult. Investigators determined that Sally was killed just 10 meters from the door of her house, and the path from the car to the building was also very short. The attacker must have attacked her almost immediately after she left the car. The police first suspected her ex-boyfriend Lewis. He was the last person to see Sally, and her murder occurred almost immediately after she got out of the car. In addition, investigators found that the couple often quarreled, and in the past several times it came to calling the police, but no one brought any charges. The police tracked him down and arrested him that same day. During interrogation, he stated that he did not even know about Sally's death until the detectives told him about it. He admitted that there had indeed been an argument between them that night, but denied any involvement in the murder. According to his version, as soon as Sally got out of the car, he drove away. Investigators were in no hurry to believe the guy, since everything really looked not in his favor. He was held in custody for 4 days while detectives awaited the results of a DNA test. Ultimately, it turned out that his DNA did not match the sample, and Lewis was released. At the same time, experts discovered another interesting detail. The DNA sample found on Sally's body was involved in a 4-year-old criminal case. In 2001, a woman called from a phone booth located in the parking lot of a store. At some point, a man entered the booth, undressed and committed lewd acts. He did not touch the woman and ran away, but left his seed on the floor of the booth. The victim contacted the police, and the pervert's DNA sample was attached to the case. However, the culprit was never found. All this happened not so far from the place of Sally's murder, 2.5 kilometers. The police realized that they were dealing with a serial pervert who had been operating for several years. The only question was how many girls had suffered at the hands of this maniac and when he would strike next. Detectives had to find him before he ruined someone else's life. It soon became clear that the police's fears were not in vain. Just an hour before Sally was killed, a woman was attacked on a nearby street. She was walking home, talking on her cell phone. At some point, a man approached her, apologized and immediately struck her. The woman screamed and dropped the phone, but then something happened that the attacker clearly did not expect. A taxi car appeared on the road, and it scared him away. He grabbed the victim's phone and fled. There is one creepy moment worth noting here. The person on the other end of the line the woman was talking to was still on the line and heard everything, even after the criminal took the phone and disappeared from the victim's sight. Her cries for help did not become quieter. This meant that he was hiding very close by. Perhaps he hoped that the taxi driver would pass by and the victim would be at his disposal again. Luckily, the driver heard the screams and stopped. He put the woman in the car and took her to the hospital. There she called the police and told about what happened. According to her description, the attacker was a white man, 25 to 30 years old, about 180 centimeters tall, with short dark hair. Based on these data, the police compiled a composite photo, which was published by the media. Alas, a large number of men fell under such a vague description. So detectives received hundreds of calls from local residents. They all said that the identikit looked like someone they knew or that they had seen a similar person somewhere. Each such call was checked by the police, but this did not bring any results. Realizing that it would be impossible to find the maniac using an identikit, investigators decided to take a different path. Their only lead was a DNA sample found on the victim's body. In addition, detectives were confident that the perpetrator lived in the area. This was evidenced by the fact that he also attacked a woman in a telephone booth on a nearby street. As a result, it was decided to conduct DNA screening of the entire area. Police officers had to go into every apartment and house, ask questions and ask residents to voluntarily provide the DNA samples. Of course, the detectives did not hope that the criminal would give them his DNA, but it was enough for them to obtain a sample from his relatives to get closer to catching the culprit. For example, this man could live with parents who did not know about his atrocities and would willingly provide the DNA to the police. Over the next 6 months, police officers visited more than 6,000 addresses. Many residents of the area provided the DNA samples, but the entire operation came to nothing. Despite the efforts of law enforcement agencies, experts in the laboratory did not find any matches with the criminal's sample. All this time, the population of Croydon was in fear, and police patrols only increased the anxiety. They all knew that a maniac was operating on their streets. Women were afraid to walk in the dark, parents did not let their children go for walks. As a result, the police had to return to the sketch, since there was nothing else to work with. They contacted the woman who was attacked by the maniac on the day of Sally's murder, as well as the victim from the phone booth. They were asked to again describe the criminal's appearance, and based on this testimony, detectives compiled an adjusted version of the sketch. The police showed it at a press conference, and also for the first time revealed some details of the crimes committed, which until that moment had been kept secret. This was done with the expectation that the residents of Croydon would understand how dangerous a maniac was walking freely through their streets and would be more attentive. Alas, all this also did not bring any results. The updated sketch was not very different from the previous one and was too generalized. Thousands of men living in this area came under it. But then something happened that no one expected, a completely accidental breakthrough in this matter. A man was sitting at a bar watching football. After drinking heavily, he began to argue with one of the visitors, and soon their conflict escalated into a brawl on the street. Unfortunately for him, a policeman was passing by as he pushed his opponent to the ground. He detained the attacker and took him to the station. Something strange began there. The instigator of the conflict, 35-year-old Mark Dixie, fell into a real panic and almost cried. This was very illogical behavior, because he was detained for a minor offense. Most likely, his opponent would not have brought any charges at all, and the man could safely go home. The police considered him very suspicious, but they soon had to release him on bail. Before this, they carried out the standard procedure for all detainees. They took his fingerprints and a DNA sample. 12 days passed, detectives received a call from the laboratory, and experts made an unexpected statement. Mark Dixie's DNA was a complete match to the sample found on Sally's body. The investigators realized that they had a dangerous maniac in their hands, but they let him go. In any case, the law would not have allowed him to be kept longer, and now the police had to rearrest the criminal. Unfortunately for them, Dixie fled to Amsterdam immediately after his release. The British authorities put him on the wanted list, but the man successfully escaped. This went on for 3 months until something strange happened. The criminal quarreled with the owner of the apartment he was renting in Amsterdam and returned back to England. Moreover, he returned to his previous job, making the work of the police much easier. On June 28, 2006, almost a year after the murder, he was finally arrested and this time accused of a whole series of serious crimes. Having studied his biography, the police found out that Mark had a very rich criminal history. He committed his first crime in 1986, when he was 16 years old. He attacked a woman with a knife, robbed her and committed indecent assault. He was sentenced to only 6 months in prison due to his age. Each subsequent year, Mark was again put on trial for robbery and harassment, and in 1990 he was arrested for assaulting a police officer. Unfortunately, all these times the judicial system was favorable to him, and the man received a short sentence and continued to commit crimes. In 1993, he moved to Australia, where he picked up his old ways. 5 years later, he entered the home of a young girl, robbed her and abused her. Then he was arrested for exhibitionism in the park, and in 1999 he was deported from the country. Unfortunately, in those years the police had not yet collected DNA samples from criminals, so Dixie's DNA with the body of the murdered girl did not show any matches in the existing databases. The police had a lot of work to do before taking the case to court. They discovered that on the night of Sally's murder, Dixie had been celebrating his birthday at a bar with friends on Brighton Road, a few hundred meters from her home. He had an argument with his girlfriend over the phone and spent the rest of the evening abusing alcohol and illicit substances. He closed himself off and barely communicated with anyone. After the bar closed, Mark and his 2 girlfriends went to a house nearby. After waiting for them to fall asleep, the man took a knife and went outside. According to investigators, it was he who attacked the girl, who was saved from death by a taxi driver. Fearing that she would call the police, Mark went to another street. Unfortunately, it was at that moment that Sally Bowman got out of the car and walked towards her door. He attacked her, subjected her to violence and fled. Apparently, it was him, walking down the street, that the neighbors saw from their windows that night. After killing Sally, he returned back to the apartment and calmly went to bed. Mark Dixie's trial began on February 5, 2008. He refused to admit his guilt, and instead made up a truly ridiculous story. According to his version, he was just walking down the street and saw Sally lying on the ground. Taking advantage of the situation, he subjected her to violence and left, and someone else killed the girl. Dixie stated that he allegedly did not know that the girl was dead. During the trial, a woman from Australia was also found, whom Dixie attacked in 1998. He subjected her to violence, stabbed her 7 times, but was never punished. The jury unanimously found Dixie guilty of Sally's murder, despite his ridiculous story. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum prison term of 34 years. After that, he was transferred several times from one prison to another, because each time his fellow inmates mocked him and tried to kill him. All this time, Mark continued to deny his involvement in the murder, and only in 2015, 10 years later, he confessed. His situation did not worsen from this, but the police managed to prove his involvement in other crimes. In 2017, it was revealed that an innocent Dutch national had served 12 years in prison for attacks on 3 women in Spain that were actually carried out by Mark Dixie. In addition, the criminal also voluntarily confessed to another attack, which he committed 16 years ago. Dixie attacked a woman in a parking lot, assaulted her, stole money and credit cards, and set her car on fire. That same evening, he found out her home phone number, called and began to taunt the victim. After this, the woman moved to live in the village because she could not cope with the injury. That same year, Dixie was found guilty of assaulting 2 women in Croydon, for which he received another life sentence for each. 2017 was marked by another unpleasant event. Sally's family had to exhume her remains because unknown vandals kept desecrating her grave. Relatives decided to cremate her and leave her ashes at home. After all these trials, Sally's mother is an active supporter of the National DNA Database. In her opinion, if the government collects DNA samples from all residents of the UK, such crimes will be solved in a day, and not in 9 months. In addition, the woman was sure that if the criminal had not left his DNA at the crime scene, Sally's ex-boyfriend would have gone to life in prison for a murder he did not commit. The detective leading the investigation into Sally's murder supported the DNA database idea, but the government rejected it. In their opinion, forced DNA collection would violate basic human rights. This question is very ambiguous. On the one hand, such a database would really help solve such crimes in a matter of hours. In addition, some criminals would not dare to commit a crime, knowing that they could be identified very quickly. On the other hand, not every criminal leaves his DNA. In addition, leakage of information from such a database or abuse of it can really harm law-abiding people. Do you think such databases are needed? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to rate the video if you liked it. Stay safe and thanks for watching.